Flavius Aetius was born into a world that was already collapsing. The Roman Empire, which had once stretched from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Britain, was breaking apart. Its armies were weaker than ever before, its emperors were no longer masters of their destiny, and barbarian tribes pressed against its borders like waves against a drowning ship. Into this storm, around the year 396, came a child who would one day be remembered as the last great hope of the West. His father, Gaudentius, was a Roman officer of high command, respected for his service and loyalty, while his mother belonged to a noble family steeped in Roman tradition. But Aetius was not destined to live a life of quiet nobility. His path would be forged by exile, hardship, and blood. As a boy he was given as a hostage to the Visigoths. It was common in those days for Rome to secure treaties by sending the sons of its nobles into the hands of its enemies. For most children it was a terrifying fate, but for Aetius it became a strange kind of education. He lived among the Visigoths, sharing their food, learning their tongue, watching their warriors fight. He learned that courage and strength mattered more to them than birth or wealth. He learned to ride as they rode, to hunt in their forests, to endure the roughness of their life without complaint. The Goths came to respect the young Roman who did not break, who adapted to their ways and proved himself among them. Later he was sent to the Huns, the most feared people of the age. No other boy of Rome could have imagined such a fate, yet Aetius did not shrink from it. The Huns lived as no Romans lived. They were born in the saddle, they fought as if the bow was part of their very body, and they moved with a speed that made them seem less like men and more like a storm. Among them Aetius learned not only how to ride with unmatched skill but also how they thought, how they planned, and how they fought. They laughed at his Roman manners, but they could not laugh at his courage. Slowly, even among these ferocious warriors, he earned respect. He was no longer only a Roman boy. He had become something else, something greater, a man who carried within himself the wisdom of two worlds. When he finally returned to Roman service, he carried that knowledge like a hidden weapon. The empire he returned to was already weakened. Emperors ruled only in name, generals betrayed one another, and provinces slipped away under barbarian pressure. Yet Aetius walked into this world not as a frightened officer but as a man prepared for survival. He began his career in the cavalry and quickly proved himself. Soldiers sensed something different in him. He was calm in the face of fear, steady in the midst of chaos, and he spoke with the quiet confidence of one who had already lived among death. In the wars of the 420s he showed his skill. He fought the Visigoths in Gaul, checked tribes along the Rhine, and played a dangerous game in Rome's civil struggles. When rivals threatened him, he did the unthinkable. He called upon the Huns, his old hosts, to ride to his aid. Tens of thousands of them crossed into Italy under his banner, and with their help he crushed his enemies. Many Romans whispered that this was betrayal, that Aetius was playing with fire. But unlike so many generals who used barbarians to carve out kingdoms of their own, Aetius remained true to Rome. He used the Huns to strengthen the empire, not to destroy it. Step by step he rose until he became Magister Militum, the master of soldiers, the highest military command in the West. The emperors sat helpless in Ravenna while Aetius held the empire together with cunning, diplomacy, and the sword. He played tribes against each other, sometimes bribing, sometimes striking. Always balancing the fragile survival of the empire. When the Burgundians rebelled he unleashed the Huns upon them so savagely that their destruction became legend, remembered in the songs of the Nibelungs. He kept the Franks at bay, managed fragile treaties with the Visigoths, and secured Gaul against collapse. Rome endured because he endured. Yet even as he struggled to hold the West together, a greater shadow rose in the East. The Huns had found a leader unlike any other, a man who turned scattered tribes into a war machine. Attila. Where he rode, cities fell. He forced the Eastern Empire to pay him tribute, silver flowing like rivers into his coffers. He crushed armies, burned villages, and spread terror across Europe. To his enemies he was the scourge of God, sent to punish the world. To his warriors he was the chosen master destined to rule all nations. And now his gaze turned to Gaul. Aetius knew what this meant. He had lived among the Huns. He understood their methods and their hunger. He knew that Attila would not stop with plunder. He would break Gaul, enslave its people, and open the road to Rome itself. If the West was to be saved, it could not be Rome alone that stood against him. The empire no longer had the strength. Only a coalition of enemies turned into allies could resist the storm. So Aetius did what no other Roman could have done. He turned to the Visigoths, Rome's old foes, and spoke to their king Theodoric. He told him that Attila's conquest would not stop with Rome, that the Goths themselves would be crushed if they did not resist. Theodoric listened, proud and suspicious, but in the end he agreed. For the first time Visigoths and Romans would fight side by side. Aetius then turned to the Franks, to the Burgundians, to every tribe that feared Hun domination. One by one he convinced them. Some with promises, some with threats, some with appeals to their survival. Against all odds he forged an army that was not Roman, not Gothic, not Frankish, but a mixture of all, united only by the need to stop Attila. Meanwhile Attila swept across Gaul. Cities fell before him. Metz was destroyed, Paris prayed for its life, Troyes awaited doom. His army was a tide of horsemen, unstoppable, merciless. Panic spread across the land, but Aetius remained calm. He gathered his allies, moved them with care, and prepared to meet the storm on ground of his choosing. The two armies faced each other on the plains of Chalon. It was a place made for horsemen, wide and open, where cavalry could maneuver freely. Attila's horde stretched across the horizon, countless warriors under the banners of the Huns. Opposite them stood Aetius's coalition, Romans in the center, Visigoths on one flank, Franks and Burgundians on the other. The air was heavy with destiny. The battle began with the roar of charging cavalry. The Huns came like a wave, their arrows blotting out the sky. But Aetius had prepared. The shields of the Romans locked tight, the Visigoths surged forward in counterattack, and the line held. The earth shook under the weight of men and horses, steel clashed against steel, the cries of the dying filled the air. In the chaos Theodoric, king of the Visigoths, fought with unmatched bravery, leading his warriors from the front. He struck down enemy after enemy until fate struck him down. He fell in the crush of battle, trampled beneath hooves. Word of his death spread, but instead of breaking the Visigoths it filled them with fury. They fought with the rage of vengeance, hurling themselves at the Huns with even greater ferocity. Aetius moved like a master across the field, sending aid where the line wavered, pressing forward where the enemy weakened. He seemed to be everywhere, a figure of calm strength that steadied the heart of every soldier who saw him. Attila pressed harder, sending wave after wave, but the coalition bent and did not break. By nightfall the plain was soaked with blood, tens of thousands lay dead, and Attila himself had withdrawn behind a circle of wagons, ready to burn himself alive if the allies broke through. For the first time in his life he had been stopped. Aetius chose not to destroy him completely. He feared that if the Huns vanished, the Visigoths would grow too strong and Rome would face a new threat. So he let Attila retreat, defeated but alive. It was a cold calculation, one only Aetius would have made, but it preserved the balance of power and secured the West from destruction. The victory was celebrated across the empire. Rome had not fallen, civilization had not perished, and the terror of Attila had been checked. People called Aetius the savior of the West, the last Roman general, the man who had done what no emperor could do. He had united enemies, stood against the greatest conqueror of the age, and proved that Rome still lived. For a moment the empire breathed again. But within the court of Ravenna, envy and fear stirred. Emperor Valentinian III was weak, ruled by whispers. Courtiers told him that Aetius was too powerful, that he might seize the throne, that he was more emperor than the emperor himself. Valentinian, insecure and jealous, believed them. The man who had saved his empire became the man he feared most. In 454 Aetius came to the palace to report on the affairs of the empire. He came unarmed, loyal, as he always had been. Valentinian suddenly rose during the meeting, drew his sword, and stabbed him with his own hand. The great general fell to the floor, betrayed not by his enemies but by the emperor he had served. The courtiers stood in shock until one of them spoke words that would echo forever: "You have cut off your right hand with your left." Rome had lost its last protector. Within 20 years the Western Empire would collapse, its emperors dethroned, its provinces consumed by the very tribes Aetius had held at bay. Yet his name lived on. He was remembered as the last of the Romans, the man who stood when all else fell, who faced Attila the Hun and did not yield, who carried the empire on his shoulders when it was already falling. Flavius Aetius died betrayed, but he died a hero. His legacy was not of crowns or palaces but of courage, loyalty, and the will to fight for a world that was crumbling. In the twilight of Rome he was its brightest flame, and though the empire itself perished, his memory endured as the man who delayed the darkness and gave the West its final moment of glory.